With Russia committing virtually its entire military to the war in Ukraine, it begs the question, do they actually have anything left at home to defend the motherland? With Russia repeatedly mentioning NATO's eastward expansion as a major concern, have they kept those areas bordering NATO defended? Even internal threats can and actually have appeared, like Wagner's rebellion in 2023 that marched halfway to Moscow almost completely unopposed, highlighting the need to maintain a military presence internally as well. So what is actually left for Russia to defend itself? But first, our sponsor, Incogni. Ever wonder who's got your personal information? Data brokers are scooping up your name, address, and even social security number, selling it to anyone who's willing to pay. Worse, people search websites will slap your details online for anyone to see. Scammers, stalkers, you name it. I learned this the hard way when I found my full address and phone number on a sketchy site, and then soon started receiving robocalls flooding my phone. You've almost certainly had it happen to you too, maybe even in some more subtle ways you might not immediately notice. First, these sites make it easy for anyone, strangers or worse, to dig into your private world. Second, they can put your family at risk by exposing household details, sometimes even kids' info. Incogni stops this nightmare. It automatically contacts data brokers, demanding that they delete your data, and handles their pushback. And their plans ensure that your info will stay off the market with repeated cleanups. Don't wait for identity theft or harassment to hit. Sign up for Incogni today and take back your privacy before it's too late. Use my code CABAL with the link in the description and you'll get 60% off their annual plan. So go take back control of your privacy now. First, a couple quick caveats. With the ongoing war, Russia has been making a lot of changes to its military, like creating new units and even changing military districts. I spent a lot of time mapping them all in 2022 just to have it all be outdated now. So for this, I'm actually using Status 6's Russian military installation KML file, which, if you haven't seen before, is just absolutely incredible. Seriously, if you have any interest in looking at these places yourself, go and check it out. I believe he has around 3,000 sites marked. Everything from motor rifle brigades down to individual communication posts, and everything in between. It's just an unbelievable resource. So huge credit to Status 6 and all those who contributed. But, as I mentioned with all the changes occurring, some of the units and their names might have changed since the last update, but it's really not that big of a deal because typically the same physical bases continue to be used. Then also for this video, I've eliminated a few bases that don't have any recent satellite imagery. Since we're looking at how the bases have changed or declined, and not looking for total numbers, this really isn't a big deal either. And finally, this is only looking at active bases inside of Russia, not things like storage bases I've looked at before, or training or testing grounds. Only tank and motor rifle units. Those we have vehicles we can visibly see to observe changes. Infantry inside of barracks, obviously we can't see. So with all that out of the way, Russia's army is broken into military districts. The eastern and central districts have a lot less military presence since it covers sparsely populated Siberia, and Russia really doesn't have any serious threats coming from neighboring countries there. The three in western Russia, Leningrad, Moscow, and the southern military districts are larger due to them bordering things like NATO, as well as Ukraine right now. Within each military districts are what they call field armies, like combined arms armies or tank armies. There's other smaller separate units too, but to keep things simple, inside each army are brigades, or a few divisions made up of smaller regiments, or a mix of both. Now, when looking at these units, it's important to know what should be there to compare it to. Soviet and even Russian units are a bit funny, with all the reforms over the last few decades converting from divisions and regiments to brigades, and lately switching back again. It's just a mess to track. But for the most part, when it comes to tank and motor rifle units, regiments and brigades, at least on paper, often have the same number of vehicles assigned. Tank brigades and regiments typically have close to 100 tanks and then 30 to 50 AFVs. Then motor rifle brigades and regiments, just about 40 tanks, but 150 or more AFVs. In addition, these typically have a few hundred trucks for logistics, maintenance, and other general purposes. But it's also important to note that individual units will vary in size. So now that we have the structure down and the typical number of vehicles that we should see, let's take a look. The first ones I figured we should look at are those in Moscow, the most famous of which being the 1st Guards Tank Army. Most interesting, and the one with the best imagery to compare to, is the huge 4th Guards Tank Division. Now, unlike a tank brigade, which is less than 100 tanks, tank divisions typically have over 300. Compared to 2019, by 2023, it looks like a ghost town. Now obviously there are numerous garages, but this base has always been extremely active for years. Decades even, going back to Soviet times, there's always been a lot of activity. Now it just feels almost abandoned. And it appearing so empty isn't just due to the fact that it's deployed to Ukraine. The 4th Tank Division is one that was almost just decimated during the 2022 Kharkiv offensive by Ukraine. There, it was caught off guard without support. They had to abandon massive numbers of perfectly intact tanks and vehicles just to avoid the entire division being encircled, losing an estimated half of all of its tanks. Moving on, here is the 21st Motor Rifle Brigade that became the 27th Division in early 2024. But as you can see here, it's virtually empty. The 21st was always large for a brigade, having nearly twice the typical number of tanks, so it was already close to that division size. But we know where they've gone. Right now, all 3 of its motor rifle regiments are right on the front line, involved in some of the heaviest fighting in the Pavlovsk offensive. And the same story is true with the 90th Tank Division, which is almost completely gone, and also right now fighting for Pavlovsk. And there are countless more, like the 30th Motor Rifle Brigade, where there's just a few trucks remaining. The same situation with the 35th Motor Rifle Brigade. The 15th Motor Rifle Brigade is now devoid of any vehicles whatsoever. The 55th is the same story, just emptied. And I could go on and on all day, but you get the picture. Now you might say, obviously they're empty, they're fighting a war in Ukraine, which is true. But there's something almost creepy about seeing so many military bases just emptied out. Every image, for years, always vehicles in activity, then suddenly nothing. And it leaves Russia pretty vulnerable if any other country wants to take advantage of the situation. Russia borders several NATO countries, including a long border with the newly joined Finland. So let's take a look at those. First, starting in the northwest, is a real interesting one. The 80th Arctic Motor Rifle Brigade is just 50 kilometers away from Finland. It's a base you'd expect Russia would really want to keep equipped and ready if they really expect hostilities to break out with NATO, especially with Finland's Jaeger Brigade just across the border. As we see from 2020 to 2024, at least 1 battalion worth of equipment has disappeared, which matches reports that it's been sent to Ukraine. This unit is actually pretty unique. It's actually part of the Russian Navy, and it doesn't follow the typical TONE of motor rifle brigades. And that's due to its location so far north and specializing in Arctic warfare. It has no tanks, but instead consists of mostly specialized Arctic vehicles. Now getting out of the Arctic, but still along the border with Finland, is the 69th Motor Rifle Division. This appears not to have decreased at all, despite the fact we know several of its regiments were in Ukraine fighting in 2024 when this image was taken. This is explained though by the fact that the 69th Division is actually brand new. The past image is from when it was a smaller brigade. So now being a division, we should see many more vehicles, but those are in Ukraine, so it all equals out. One cool scene you can see here though from 2024 is roughly a dozen tanks actively maneuvering at the base's training ground just to the north. Also, just popping up in the news as I finish this video is reports that the base is expanding. The area it shows is tents for troops and mentioning the digging of trenches, which isn't anything new or even interesting. This area here, as well as throughout Russia, is for training, and it's right next to that tank training ground. Tents pop up here for military exercises and training, they practice digging trenches, and then they tear it all down when they're done. These are not permanent structures, they're tents. The image they show is from 2025, here's one from April 2024, and it's been going on here all the way back to a 2005 image I found. Even in this 1984 image, you can see tents, trucks, and other vehicles for training. So maybe there's more going on elsewhere, but not really here. I see this post here was just taken from the New York Times without citing it, and I expect the New York Times did their research. That article though is behind a paywall, and as I said, this just came out, so I haven't had a chance to fully look. But what they show in this satellite image is nothing new. But moving on a bit quicker, the 25th Motor Rifle Brigade near the border with Estonia hasn't seen many changes, save for a few tents here on the right. And finally, a few tank regiments in Kaliningrad have shrunk considerably. I think it's safe to say that they're not all hiding in these garages, given the fact that a few have had their roofs collapse in the last couple years. So it seems Russia is still trying to hold on and keep some sort of force along its borders with NATO. So far, no clear signs of major expansion, but they've absolutely kept those bases more equipped than others deeper inside of Russia, which again is strange for Russia. Throughout history, they've always kept a large military presence around Moscow itself to handle any coup attempt, or even use it to conduct a coup themselves in 1991. And this practice, or even paranoia if you want to call it that, proved itself valid when in 2023 Yuri Prigozhin and his Wagner group were able to march halfway to Moscow with such ease and virtually unchallenged, partly due to this decreased military presence.